Good morning, everybody, or good evening. Hi, everyone. My name is Clemencia Muñoz, and I'm the chief of the UN Women Training Center, for those of you who don't know me. And welcome to the 4th online lecture by global experts on care economy. Let me introduce to today's speaker, Dr. Valeria Esquivel. Valeria joined UNRIST, the UN Research Institute for Social Development, in August 2014, recently, as research coordinator on gender and development. In her role, Valeria is responsible for conceptualizing, developing, and managing research on gender-related issues of concern for the UN system and other stakeholders within the frame of UNRIST research agenda. Prior to joining UNRIST, Valeria was Associate Professor of Economics in the Universidad Nacional de General Sarmiento in Argentina and researcher of the CONICET, the Argentine National Research Council. In the past, she collaborated with UNRIST for the project on the political and social economy of care for almost 3 years, from 2006 to 2009, as part of the Argentinian research team. An internationally recognized feminist economist, Valeria's academic work cuts across the field of labor markets and social policy, notably on issues of unpaid work, time use, and care. She has also done work on gender-aware macroeconomics, particularly in Latin America. Her approach has always been multidisciplinary, and she's equally familiar with quantitative and qualitative research tools. Much of her work emphasizes the importance of framing and of knowledge production from the South. After completing her bachelor's degree in economics at the University of Buenos Aires, Valeria continued her postgraduate studies in the United Kingdom, obtaining her master's degree and PhD in economics from the University of London. Valeria's lecture today will focus on measuring unpaid care work with public policies in mind. I don't think I need to introduce you at this stage, Amaya, but Amaya is the moderator of the course, and so let me hand this lecture now to Amaya. I'm sure you will enjoy Valeria's presentation, and thank you, Valeria, for being here, and thank you all the participants for being here today.
Thanks to you, Clemencia. I would like to take a couple of minutes, extra minutes, to explain you a bit more on the ways that we will try to interact today. After my brief introduction, Valeria will have approximately 30 minutes to make her presentation on measuring unpaid care work with public policies in mind, and then we will have, as always, our question and answer session. For today, we will try to... Sorry, that my PowerPoint is, yeah. So for today we will have the way of making questions that we have been using during the previous online lectures, where you have to type the question. As you know and you have already used, you need to know the question section at the bottom area of the webinar console. You must click on the plus to ensure that the questions are visible. And then a box will appear where you can type in your questions at any time during the online lecture. So you can do that at any time during the lecture. And we will come back to your questions at the end of Valeria's presentation. But today we will have another way of making questions. We will try to give you voice. For that, you need to note the icon with the hand. Hope that you can see it. So you can raise your hands to let us know that you want to make a question with your own voice, orally, we mean. And we will unmute your microphone in due time so you can make directly your questions to Valeria. But this, we will do it at the end. So you can type your questions at any moment during Valeria's lecture, and then at the end, in the question and answer section, you can raise your hand and we give you voice. We will wait a minute to see if we can hear you, but if we can't, we will pass to another participant. So In the meantime, you can check, you can make an audio check. You can just go to the help button and make an audio check in case that we can't hear you, and then we come back to you again. This is in order not to take a long time waiting for everyone to check their problems in case you have any. So without further delay, I think that I will give the floor to Valeria, because that's what we really want to do today, listening to her. So Valeria, I make you presenter, and we hear you. We listen to you. Thanks.
Hello, hopefully you can listen and are seeing the presentation. Amaya, could you confirm that for me?
Yes, we are seeing it, but we are not seeing it now in presentation mode. Perfect.
Okay, great. Okay, hi everyone. Thank you, Clemencia, for the presentation, and to you and Amaya for inviting me to join you all in this online young women's course on the care economy. I am going to, I have only 30 minutes, and so I'm quite mindful of time, and so I prepared quite a heavily written presentation, which is not that usual in my case, in order not to forget anything and for you to be able to read, since you will see everything that I've tried to compress for this presentation in written. So let me start by, when this moves, okay. Let me start by defining unpaid care work. So unpaid care work refers to care of persons and housework performed within households without pay and unpaid community work. So unpaid care work is unpaid because it arises out of social and contractual obligations such as marriage or kinship. It is care because it's a group of activities that serves people in their well-being, and it is work because it is an activity or a group of activities that has costs in terms of time and energy. The definition of the unpaid care work based on work activities, that means quantifiable ways of spending time, makes unpaid care work particularly amenable to being measured using time use surveys. And you already know, because there were other presenters, that feminist economists has long identified unpaid care work as a crucial dimension of well-being for those who benefit from the care received, but also as a cost for those who provide care, mostly women. These material costs, in terms of energy and health sometimes, foregone employment opportunities, income and entitlements to social security, and the enjoyment of leisure time are all major drivers of gender inequalities, both within households and beyond them, particularly in the market sphere. So time use surveys are the only way of measuring unpaid care work. So time use surveys show how individuals spend their time during the day or a week, which provides evidence of the gender division of labor within households and the interdependence of women's and men's paid and unpaid work. Time use surveys have been collected in one form or another in more than 60 countries. Yet, where time use data exists, they are not much used in evidence-based, gender-sensitive policymaking. And this fact poses a major challenge to feminist scholars and development agencies trying to convince governments and statistical offices to collect such data on a regular basis. So why is this? Why is it that we've fought so much to have time use surveys collected, and yet when we have them, they didn't make the impact we were hoping for? So among the reasons for the gap between the availability of time use data and the lack of influence in informing gender-sensitive policy making, I'm going to stress three. The first one is an overemphasis on accounting for women's unpaid care work within the framework of the United Nations system of national accounts, which has resulted in an almost exclusive focus on the production of very aggregate and crude time use estimates. The inadequate design of some time use surveys, which might explain why policymakers have not put time use data to immediate use. And lastly, a neglect of distributive justice agenda tied to measuring and valuing unpaid care work, which has diminished the possibility of defining a clear set of agreed upon gender-sensitive policies that time use data could help illuminate. So these three reasons I'm going to develop now. The overemphasis on the SNA framework. I like to start always with the Beijing Platform for Action. We are preparing to have it will be next year 20 years for Beijing, and it was certainly a crucial moment for women's movement, and there is a lot to congratulate those women there, but also in terms of measuring unpaid care work and the agendas and the way it was framed in Beijing. We've done so much because of Beijing, and yet it might be among other things because of Beijing that we didn't do enough up to now. So let me start by what the platform says. The platform calls countries to developing methods for assessing the value in quantitative terms of unremunerated work that is outside national accounts, such as caring for dependents and preparing food, for possible reflections in satellite or other official accounts that may be produced separately but are consistent with the core national accounts, with a view to recognizing, with a view to recognizing the economic contribution of women and making visible the unequal distribution of remunerated and unremunerated work between women and men. This connection between time use data and estimates of unpaid care work reflects what Lourdes Veneria has called the Accounting for Women's Work project, which means make women's work counted in statistics, accounted for in representations of how the economists work, and taken into account when policy is made. These are words of Diana Nelson. A strong emphasis on recognition and visibility were major objectives for this accounted endeavor, elements that are related to the political agenda behind the call for time use data collection. All these aspects profoundly shaped advocacy for time use studies at the time and are still strongly present in the discourse of feminist national accountants and UN gender agencies. But producing household sector satellite accounts does not by itself change macroeconomic policy. For the household sector to be incorporated in macroeconomic modeling and eventually in macroeconomic decision making, a theoretical framework is required that had not yet been fully developed in 1995. Calculations of the aggregate monetary value of unpaid care work and its comparison to other economic aggregates like GDP are more useful in showing its structural role in supporting the paid economy and informing long-term development policy. And indeed, satellite accounts are more likely to have relevance for policy in the long run when they make it possible to track relative changes in the size and composition of market production and household production. But to be so, they need to be available at regular intervals and not as one-off calculations. So, but again, for the short and medium-term policy, information about the unpaid care work devoted to caring for the ill or frail or children or water collection or transportation, for example, is likely to be more policy relevant than aggregate household sector satellite accounts, in particular regarding to debates around public expenditure. And also, and this is very much related to well-being, time use surveys have demonstrated that women and men living in income-poor households spend more time in unpaid care work than in non-poor households, as poverty is associated with lack of infrastructure and limited access to care services. Then time use data could become a powerful policy evaluation tool, for example, showing the hidden cost of conditionality of women, and also to calculate or to influence well-being indicators, for example, the time and income poverty measure, to show that time poverty exists and women can become further impoverished in income terms as a result. So what I'm saying basically is that from the macro, very aggregate view that Beijing had 20 years ago, we've developed down the line more nuanced and potentially very fruitful ways of analyzing time use data that could help, really help designing and monitoring policies, either macro policies or social policies. But the overemphasis on accounting for women's unpaid care work, which to put it more bluntly or clearly, it is this whole issue about saying that women's unpaid care work is 20% of GDP or 30% of GDP or 60% of GDP. Yet, what do we do with that number? That is what I'm saying in a nutshell. And again, to get to that number, to get to that magic number, which is an aggregate, has meant in many times that the time use surveys, the time use methodologies that are used lack detail, and even when so that lack of detail does not allow to produce those more nuanced analysis I mentioned before. Some time use surveys, particularly those using stylized diaries or short task lists, have simply asked for time spent in domestic work, paying no attention to differentiate it from subsistence production or between housework and care work. And even in cases when time use data collected can provide some detail, the reports, what we read when we receive the findings of those time use surveys, frequently show only very aggregate data devoted to a reduced number of activities disaggregated by gender, dismissing the wealth of analytical possibilities time use data provide. In order to produce policy-relevant detailed information, time use data collection methodologies need to be shaped accordingly, and policy objectives should influence all aspects of the time use design: activity selection, sampling design and coverage, background information. The need to produce information that is granular enough to be analyzed for different population groups means that we need large samples, and we need information on household structure, on the distance to water sources, to schools, to hospital, the quality of transportation, the shopping facilities. All this information is required to be used as control if we really want to identify differential time use patterns and act and influence policy when we see those that are more gender and class unequal. A particular case in point is the methodological treatment of care work, which is qualitatively and quantitatively different from housework and above all influenced by different determinants and shaped by public policies in different ways than housework. Omitting care of persons or forcing respondents to report care only if it is a primary activity produces biased estimates, given sometimes the passive or in the background and socially undervalued nature of care. So the main methodological challenge associated with measuring care of persons using timeless surveys is appropriately collecting simultaneous activities, as simultaneity is an important feature of the care of persons. And simultaneous activities can only be measured using activity diaries. And I should emphasize, activity diaries can be and have been collected in developing countries in adapting forms to cater for many specific challenges of our context. But let me go to the more contentious, I think contentious is the right word, of my 3 points, which is the political agenda for measuring unpaid care work. And I would like to go back to the Beijing Platform for Action, because what I read, the quote that I read before, clearly establishes that measuring and valuing unpaid care work is related to visibility and recognition objectives. But you all know, claims for recognition emerge from struggles of the politics of identity, defined by sexual, gender, ethnic, religious, and national boundaries, against cultural injustice. But recognition, or cultural justice, is different from the struggle for redistribution associated with demands for economic justice. As Nancy Fraser explains, the recognition dimension corresponds to institutional patterns of cultural value, while the distributive dimension corresponds to economic structure of society. So how is it that the Beijing Platform for Action put forth such a profoundly economic theme, the measurement and valuation of unpaid care work and its inclusion in household sector satellites account in GDP, in the cultural realm, and thus deprive it of an explicit distributive justice consideration? And the answer to me has to do with how the issue was framed in Beijing. Although the issue measuring and valuing unpaid care work had already been present in previous UN conferences and it was in no way new, there was no consensus around the way it should be framed. Among the non-government NGOs that supported the initiative were the International Wages for Housework campaign, which was the main political force behind the demands for measuring and valuing unpaid care work in Beijing. So much so that was not the name that was used at the moment, but it was unremunerated work. Unpaid care work at the moment was defined by what it was not. It was not remunerated and not for what it was. The Wages for Housework campaign was opposed by the European Union delegation. This opposition is unsurprising given the controversial aspects of the Wages for Housework proposal, among them the likely deepening of the sexual division of labor and poor women's withdrawal from the labor market. And indeed, for the Wages for Housework proposal, distributive justice does not take the form of redistribution of unpaid care work, but of compensation. In exchange for women's unpaid contribution to production, it is money and not work that gets redistributed. So the agenda was clear for the Wages for Housework. I mean, it was recognize, to value, to remunerate. How the issue was settled in Beijing? Well, by leaving aside any reference to wages for housework, but accepting the accounted for women's work framework. The result meant omitting omitting any direct reference to alternative forms of distributive justice in connection to the measurement and evaluation of unpaid care work. In retrospect, sorry about this. In retrospect, this omission turned out to be counterproductive. By omitting such references, the inclusion of the unpaid care work in national account was rendered as abstract as GDP itself, that is, an issue for economists. This is one of the reasons I suspect that calls for measuring and valuing unpaid care work are repeated in some UN documents and by non-economists and feminists, using the language of recognition and visibility but without a clear view of the purpose of the endeavor. So, if we want to measure unpaid care work with a political agenda in mind, what should that agenda be? And as I think you can tell, I don't think the right agenda is remuneration, but redistribution of unpaid care work. So I will present you just to close, the RRR framework that was proposed and by Diane Ellison, taken from the RRR political framework proposed by Nancy Fraser, and think whether this is the right political agenda to finish the unfinished business of Beijing. Of course, our starting point is recognition, as much as it was in Beijing. Recognizing care work means acknowledging the nature, extent, and role of unpaid care work in any given context. In other words, it means taking care seriously, understanding the whole of its contributions to human development without losing sight of who is making those contributions. Recognition of care work goes beyond crude aggregate measures of unpaid care work and requires the development of detailed accounts and analysis that can inform precisely who's doing unpaid care work and how much. Recognition means also avoiding taking unpaid care work for granted in policy and understanding the social norms and gender stereotypes that make women the primary providers of unpaid care work. The second R is reduction. Not all unpaid care work is good in social terms. When unpaid care work is a time cost that results from lack of social or household infrastructure, the society as a whole gains from care work reduction. It is important that our understanding of these potential gains is integrated into planning and implementation of labor-saving infrastructure investment projects, and by doing so, development agents can contribute to a reduction of the costs incurred by those who engage in unpaid care activities, poor women in particular, who become even more poor as a result. And redistribution, which is, to me, key issue, because we've also moved beyond redistributing within households, between women and men, the old language of sharing responsibilities. And we go beyond the household to think of redistribution with the society as a whole through the development of policies that support the provision of or access to care services. Redistributing care provision between women and men within households challenges the gender stereotypes that associate care with femininity. Changes in economic incentives also play a part in intra-household redistribution of care responsibilities, and we all know that as long as gender wage gaps and labor opportunity gaps exist, the opportunity cost for women to assume unpaid care roles will remain lower than for men. And Still, it makes it economically rational, quote unquote, for families and households to maintain a male breadwinner female carer arrangement. But focusing, as I said, on action on the redistribution of unpaid care work only at the household level overlooks family context in which the redistribution of responsibilities is not possible, for example, because there is no other adult to share them with, or in which the care burden is so high that even when equally shared, the care needs are not met. For example, when there is a chronic ill person in the household. For this reason, redistributing care means taking action beyond household. Care is not only provided in households and communities, but also in the public sphere of markets and of the state. Who and for whom care is provided beyond households and communities alters, shapes the care provided by these two spheres, reducing their total care work and changing women's and men's shares in the care within households and communities in the process. Providing social infrastructure in the form of care services serves to redistribute care responsibilities and also to create job opportunities for women in particular. So the point is that, and again this is a view from the South, where markets play a major role in care provision, for example, when fees must be paid for care services or paid domestic workers are hired, access to care services beyond households becomes dependent on income, and this in such cases, the distribution of care services will typically reflect income inequalities, exacerbating the difficulties that poor women face in accessing job opportunities and generating income. So, social policies can also reinforce gender stereotypes, for example, when they come with conditionalities that mothers are expected to enforce. Or social policies could challenge gender stereotypes when family leaves are offered to mothers and fathers alike. So the distribution has is justice in itself, but also, if well designed, if policies are well designed, could help to counterbalance existing income inequalities. And so with this, and I hope I've been clear and have taken no more time than was allocated, I pass it to you, Amaya, and to the comments and questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to you, Valeria, for your very inspiring presentation. Now I would like to remember you that you can either type your question or raise your hand, okay? So I think there are no hands raised yet, but we already have a question by Erika, I think. Please let me take it. No, by Elise. So Valeria, the first question would be, are there any specific best practices from countries that show attempts to include the 3 R's in public policy making? What do these specific policies look like? Valeria, could you answer, Elise? Thanks. Valeria, we are not hearing you. Maybe you are talking, but you haven't unmuted your microphone.
Okay. Yes, sorry, I muted it by mistake. So are there any best practices in Triple R, and which are the policies and how the policies look like? There are 2 issues here. There are, of course, care policies, very many. And some are framed within this discourse, and some others are not, and yet they are care policies. So for example, when early childhood center, child development centers are offered and are accessible and nearby and good quality and cheap and or for free, and cater those populations who don't have access, well, that's again a policy that redistributes care beyond households. One thing that has happened with this RRR framework, and it's gaining momentum, is that it is implicit, it is, yeah, I could say it is there in the proposed gender SDG at the moment. And it doesn't necessarily say the RRR, it says something like the way it is now, the draft that is now circulating, says something like recognize unpaid care work through the provision of care services, which is a strange wording because that's not recognizing, that is redistributing. So I would say the RRR framework was behind those conversations. If it doesn't say redistribution, but if it says provide care services, I think that's helpful enough. I would love to have it a more progressive wording, but that I hope that that wording at least remains when they finally agree the SDGs. I don't know, Elise, if that answers your question.
I think we don't have any other question now, neither typed nor hands raised. So I would encourage you to take advantage of Valeria being here because she's an expert on all that. So please, yeah, now I think we have another question. Yeah, Elisa said thank you. So I guess you did answer to her question. And now we have another one, Marcela. Marcela Martino, she's asking, well, you can read the question yourself, maybe, Valeria. She's asking, what are your expectations for the Beijing Plus 20 discussions related to having a clear focus on redistribution? Valeria?
Yes, I'm sure. I'm sorry. I don't know where to read that. So apologies. I'm not reading it myself. In the chat I'm not that used to the platform as everyone is. So if you keep on reading for me, Beijing Plus 20. That's hard. You know, Beijing Plus 10 was not as we all hoped for. It was very low key. It was. It felt that things had worsened instead of improving 10 years down the line. Beijing Plus 20 will be coincidental with the debate around SDGs, and that might. Now I can read. Thank you. Sorry about not being able to read. Back to my answer. I think I'm not sure. I hope that the NGOs and all the infrastructure, the participatory infrastructure that is behind Beijing Plus 20, hopefully will make emerge new consensuses and progressive things, bring back to the fore the progressivity of progressiveness. Sorry, I'm inventing words already. But the progressiveness of Beijing back to the fore, which in many ways was an enormous achievement. Yet I think everyone is going to be thinking about the SDGs, and much of what will happen in the development sphere in the coming years will result not from Beijing Plus 20, but from whatever the SDGs we have. So I think we will have to be all very vigilant and very try to push for progressive frameworks in both conversations, which I'm not sure we will be able to, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you very much, Valeria. We still don't have any raised hands. We wanted to try this new way of making questions, but it seems that none of the participants wants to his or her voice to be heard by the others, so I would encourage you to do so. We have a third question, written question by Elise again. Elisa Paz, no? A different one, Elisa Paz. She asked, can you read, Valeria? The inadequate time
the inadequate time design could also be associated to the lack of associated costs of this survey. Were any discussions in Beijing focusing on how much will this time use cost and who should be funding it? Yeah, there is. Thank you, Lisa, because there is a lot, and there are very many undercurrents about associated with this. First of all, there is a myth about time use surveys, that they are very expensive, that they are very complicated, that they are standalone, and I have insisted, and there are examples out there in which good time use surveys can be modules of existing surveys. And you don't need to, one doesn't need to repeat to make it continuous. It doesn't necessarily, one doesn't collect time use data every single year. So it can be perfectly well a module that is attached to an ongoing labor force survey or household survey every 4 years, for example, or every 2 years is too soon. But so there are ways in which one can have good quality time use surveys that are modules, and that saves lots of money. And moreover, it sometimes improves the core survey that the module was attached to. So, so that's about cost. The other thing is that there will also be a push for collecting time use data now that the International Conference for Labor Statisticians has changed the definition of work to include unpaid care work as part of work and differentiate work from employment. So to comply with this norms or with these definitions, slowly the countries will have to collect information on employment and on work, and work meaning unpaid care work as well. So I think there is room for finding ways of collecting time use data of sufficient quality, for example using diaries, but in ways that they are incorporated into ongoing surveys and be as cheap as possible and as informative as possible. I think we've been creative enough to solve this and to produce good quality data from developing countries, having methods that differ from the standard Eurostat, for example, or US approach to time use surveys. Hopefully, Elisa, I have answered your question.
Hopefully, she can write any message to you if she wants to. We have now one raised hand. We will try to, we will change to that person, Piet, ask for having the possibility to ask you a question, Valeria, and then we will come back to the written questions. Okay. So,
Okay.
Pierre, I will try to unmute your microphone. Let's see whether it works. Yeah?
I hope you can hear me.
Perfectly.
Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Valeria, for the interesting presentation. I found it quite interesting. Taking to, well, a bit related to the previous question and the whole discussion on Beijing plus 20, plus 20, sorry. I was wondering, taking into account that gender is quite prominent in all the debates on the post-2015 agenda, being not only one goal set apart, but also influencing the other goals with the indicator, etc. Do you feel that the aspect of the care economy is taken into account sufficiently? And in this sense, how can we convince, let's say, the more hard economists on what I might call the wonders of the care economy, take into account that if we can really include or sufficiently appreciate the care economy, the whole nation or the whole world can be better off as such. They put into practice the slogan that equality for women could be progress for all. So how can we convince these hard economists of the benefits of taking into account the care economy?
Thank you. Thank you for the question and thank you for voicing it. Again, the question, I think well, any of us could say that the SDGs are short of an enormous quantity of comments we could post to them. So certainly I will kind of by default say no, the unpaid care work or the care economy is not sufficiently taken on board. But I don't think that that helps at all. I think, again, that even in the wording that is so weird and negotiated, again, Beijing was a negotiated text, and that is how a negotiated text looks like, and the SDGs as well. So as long, to me, at this point in time, as long as unpaid care work is there, in some progressive way, I think it's okay. I'm worried that it says that the wording now says something like I don't remember the exact wording, but something like as national realities allow, or as national. So again, it is left to country states to do the thing, which is always the case, but the fact that it's written there means that you may not touch, it could be difficult to see, to measure progress or to make, enforce progress in this front. If we have that that wording, some wording on unpaid care work, there will be targets and indicators, and those indicators are going to be time use indicators. So again, we can come full circle and go back to have time use surveys because the SDG has some kind of indicator associated with time use data. How to convince the hardcore economists? I think I've been reading background papers for Beijing, and there was almost a sweet view of GDP, like let's conquer GDP, and if we get unpaid care work into GDP, then every single thing good about unpaid care work will follow suit. Kind of by definition, and that didn't happen. So how to convince? I'm not sure if we have to convince the hardcore. We will have to. This is a power struggle in the sense that we want some hardcore economists I know who are heterodox will be easily convinced. It's not that hard. I think that the problem with economists is not how hardcore they are, but their views on how the world economy works. But having said that, I think that working on well-being indicators, challenging poverty and how poverty is measured, and how there are assumptions on unpaid care work, on the zero cost and infinite supply of unpaid care work. There are assumptions about that in the way we measure poverty at the moment. So challenging poverty indicators using time use data might help convince the development community in general that there is that are so worried about poverty and inequality. So let's bring in unpaid care work into the poverty and inequality conversations. I think there is room there, far more room there than room in the satellite account SNA accountants world. If I can make this controversial point as well. Amaya?
Thank you very much, Valeria. Now we come back to the written questions, and we have one from Matilde. Matilde says, Valeria, thank you for your really interesting presentation. I would like to come back on the experiences you mentioned about activity diaries used in time use surveys in developing countries. I understand the need to do so, but I am for the moment in Peru for a field work, and I really wonder, from a pragmatic point of view, how it could be used, for instance, with the matter of analphabetism. Could you give us examples of strategies to apply time use surveys this way within this context? Thank you for your answer.
Yes, I could share with you a paper, a collected piece, some colleagues and I, Indira Hiway, David Ballender, Nancy Forbury, and I published in 2008 in Feminist Economics, because of course there are ways. Maybe I should have focused in this presentation even more on time use surveys. But the left behind diary, the 24-hour schedule that Eurostat lives in a household, and every member of the household fills in as if she or he was an automat and would register every single activity every 10 minutes. That's not the model we followed in the South. Typically, and this is also an answer to Sarah Pitch's question, it is a diary that is filled in through an interview in which the interviewer asks about yesterday, helps the person think about yesterday, your day yesterday, and that day is explained chronologically by the person, aided by questions, and it is the interviewer who writes the answers of the activities over the day on a diary. It's not so. You don't need to be able to write and read in order to answer such survey. The only requirement is that you use the watch, that you know fairly well the days, the hours of the day. But even in rural areas, there are pointers of time, like the sun, like what at the time when sun rises. In Muslim places is when you pray. So there are markers of time for those who don't use watches that can be used and help in developing this chronological report on time use. So there is not one single way of collecting time use data that requires the person to be a good student who reports every single 10 minutes. On the contrary, there are ways in which the information can be framed within a diary, but without making the respondent be so overloaded with technicalities about reporting his or her day. I hope, Matilde and Sarah, I've answered your question.
Valeria, can you also read?
Yes, Marcela's. So I think I've answered Matilde's, Sarah's, and Marcela's, because this
Yes.
Marcela's question. What I'm talking about is the examples of the examples I have in mind are South Africa, Buenos Aires, Brazil, Venezuela, Chile. Well, there are many. There are many in which the diary was used, and certainly I'm not mentioning any developed countries in this list. So these are examples of diaries that have been used, and in which the people who, I mean, the Brazilian time use survey went through, I mean, reached the Amazonia. So and South Africa's time use survey, the very same thing. So you don't need to be an urban, educated person to be able to answer about your yesterday. Erika's, in the context of economic crisis, governments are putting more and more the burden of care on families. Indeed. Which arguments could be used to convince them that it's better to promote policies of redistribution of care work, that they are impoverishing their populations? Again, I think that the key argument to be made in the coming future is about poverty and inequality, that they are reinforcing inequality, that they are impoverishing families and women within families. That's the and this goes back to Amaya. What's the name of the person who posed his question and we could hear him?
Piet. I hope I'm pronouncing it properly.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Because there are colleagues who have tried to put more functionalist, put forward more functionalist arguments, like early education helps children have a better educational record, and so it's good for children, and it's more human capital type of arguments. Whether those are more convincing, I don't know. I tend not to be comfortable with those because I think there is a justice issue behind it. But if those are used and convince governments, maybe we could use them. I'm becoming more pragmatist as I grow older, I'm afraid. Amaya? I don't see any other question, and Amaya, I cannot hear you.
Oh, sorry, now I forgot to unmute my microphone. I was saying that I think that we don't have any other question or raised hand, and that we had some comments thanking you and saying that, yeah, you have answered my question, thanks. So I think that we can finish here. We can give you freedom now, Valeria. Thanks very, very much for joining us this day. I wanted to just to make a final and brief wrap-up in order to end the session. I would like to remind you that the record of this online lecture will be available in the platform in a few days, or well, as soon as possible, both in the online lecture blog and in the week 4 blog. I also wanted to note that Valeria has referred, for example, to the time and income poverty measure, and this is one of the suggested readings that Valeria sent to us and that we have sent to you in the invitation to this online lecture. So I encourage you to read those very interesting works. And just finally to remind you that our next online lecture will be next Monday. We come back to Mondays again, but at the same time, 9 a.m. EST. This lecture probably, it was thought to be focused on the care economy, on care as part of the economy. It is myself who will be in charge of that lecture, but we will also have Cam, who is the course coordinator, the course coordinator, who will talk to us about what has been said about care within the Men Engage Global Symposium, Engaging with Men and Masculinities for Development, Gender Equality and Social Justice in a Globalizing World, that has just been held in India. So we will have the pleasure that he can talk to us about how care has been introduced into this symposium. I think that's all for now, so I come back to Valeria, if you want to tell us any final word.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you for the experience, thank you for the thoughtful questions, and I think it's food for thought for me as well, and so hope you have a wonderful online course in what comes, and if anyone needs any reference, it's easy to reach me, and I will be happy to help. Thank you, Maya. It's been great.
Thank you very much. We know much more about measuring unpaid care and also about care policies. So thanks to everyone for coming today with us, and hope to see you next week. Thank you. Bye.